Welcome to day 2 of Vanderbilt Summit on Modern Conflict. My name is Niloofar Howe, and I'm a visiting professor here at Vanderbilt, and I'm going to be today's moderator as we continue our conversation about national security and modern conflict with a focus on strategic competition with China. Yesterday, we had an incredible lineup of speakers. We had 18 speakers, all experts in the China challenge from very different perspectives, some of them funny, covering the intelligence community, the military, diplomatic corps, national labs, academia, think tanks, private equity, venture capital, and the private sector. Emerging out of that conversation is a clear articulation of the threat China represents, as captured by General Timothy Howe, our opening keynote speaker, who said yesterday, China is pursuing deliberate campaigns to gain advantage in every aspect of national power. The threat posed by China is real, and Beijing is sending a pretty clear signal. Many of our panelists referred to the Chinese cyber operation Volt Typhoon as a clear example of the scope of the challenge. With this operation, Chinese hackers were clearly prepping the battlefield, establishing access to U.S. critical infrastructure in order to put assets under threat in case of a conflict between China and the United States. What emerged from these discussions is a clear sense of the urgency in rising to the China challenge from a mindset, policy, political, and especially from a technology perspective. As General Howe said, the fast will eat the slow, and so we have to be fast. As the rate of tech innovation continues to accelerate, it will have a compounding effect. The more progress you make, the faster your rate of progress becomes. And so whoever is at the leading edge of progress will have the upper hand. Managing tech progress was a little easier when we had, when we experienced one technology revolution at a time, with centuries, decades, or years to adapt. Printing press, 300 years, agricultural revolution, 200 years, industrial revolution, 100 years, technology revolution, 50 years, the internet revolution, 20 years. Today, arguably, we have multiple tech revolutions happening simultaneously with compounding effects. Today, we live in the era of exponential revolutions with little time to adapt. General AI, computational biology, commercial space, advanced materials, ubiquitous sensing, robotics, energy, social media, and information warfare. Technology revolutions not only have a dramatic effect on how we live, work, and play, but as we are experiencing also in warfare and modern conflict. One of our panels touched on how our allies, Ukraine and Israel, have deployed AI-powered platforms to great effect in their respective conflicts, combining the effects of AI, ubiquitous sensing, robotics, and edge computing to great effect. As Peter Singer, our closing keynote speaker yesterday, wrote in an article, robotic systems have been set free, authorized to destroy targets on their own. AI systems are determining which individual humans are to be killed in war, and even how many civilians are to die along with them. The battlefield has undergone a transformation like never before in a matter of months. We must act with purpose, but also with speed and agility. Public-private partnerships are key. We discussed this yesterday, and it used to be the case that the private sector had to figure out how to work with the government. Given that our exponential technology revolutions reside in the private sector today, it's the government's turn to figure out how to best partner and collaborate with the private sector. And the faster we figure this out, the higher the likelihood that we can maintain our technological advantage with respect to China. The critical ingredient in maintaining this edge is, of course, educating and training a future-ready workforce that is up to the challenge, and this is where academic institutions like Vanderbilt play a vital role. Chancellor Diermeier yesterday announced the launch of Vanderbilt's Institute for National Defense and Global Security, and this couldn't have come at a more opportune time because the stakes are incredibly high. This morning, we'll hear from Administrator of the Drug Enforcement Agency, Ann Milgram, who will talk to us about probably the biggest threat Americans face today, the fentanyl crisis. As stated in a recent report by the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the US and China, on average, fentanyl kills over 200 Americans daily. the equivalent of a packed Boeing 737 crashing every single day. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45 and a leading cause in the historic drop in American life expectancy. Drug overdose deaths stand at 112,000 a year and continue to climb. The vast majority of these are attributable to fentanyl. And to be clear, this is just the death rate tied to drug overdose. It is not the overall casualty rate, which we would expect would be an exponent of that, although there's no formal estimates. To put this in perspective, we are suffering a higher death rate annually from fentanyl than we did in the bloodiest year of World War II. While Mexican drug cartels are responsible for getting fentanyl into the US, China is the ultimate geographic source of the fentanyl crisis, as its companies, enabled and subsidized by the PRC, are the source for fentanyl precursors, which are then sold and exported into the illicit drug market. In addition to this very important conversation, including a panel conversation on the fentanyl crisis following Administrator Milgram's comments, we have a keynote address today by Deputy Undersecretary of the Army, Mario Diaz, who will discuss the Army's role in countering China in the Indo-Pacific, followed by a lunch panel discussion on defining a full-spectrum national strategy for China. That panel's unparalleled expertise with respect to US-China strategic competition will likely lead to a lively and thought-provoking conversation led by another Vanderbilt professor, General Charlie Moore. Finally, we're incredibly excited to welcome FBI Director Christopher Wray to Vanderbilt as our closing keynote for the day, as well as the conference. His breadth and depth of experience in white-collar crime, government investigations, and law enforcement is unparalleled, and we very much look forward to his comments. By the time we conclude the conference today, we will have heard from over 30 experts from a broad set of backgrounds and perspectives on the topic of national security, modern conflict, and emerging threats, with a focus on strategic competition with China. But we aren't there yet. I'm thrilled to be starting our day with a keynote address by DEA Administrator Anne Milgram. As administrator, she leads an agency of nearly 10,000 public servants who work in DEA's 334 offices across the globe. Prior to assuming her duties at the DEA, Administrator Milgram served as New Jersey's Attorney General, focused on reforming systems through smart data, analytics, and technology. Anne Milgram has worked as a prosecutor, a state attorney general, a philanthropy executive, and an NYU law professor to transform the American criminal justice system. From transforming the Camden, New Jersey Police Department to building a national risk tool for courts and law enforcement and a diversion tool for mental health and substance abuse, Administrator Milgram has worked to reform systems, cultures, and business practices to provide a stronger, more evidence-based approach to public safety. As New Jersey Attorney General, Milgram oversaw the police department of the most dangerous city in America, Camden, New Jersey. Using data and analytics, Milgram began a deep transformation of the police department, ultimately reducing violent crime by more than 40% in 1 year. Her visionary leadership in Camden has created a new nationally recognized paradigm for law enforcement. Administrator Milgram has led efforts to bring about a paradigm shift in how we think about innovation, the use of data and decision-making in government, from transforming public safety through police officers and prosecutors to combining healthcare and crime data sets to identify opportunities to reduce crime and unnecessary hospitalizations. No one is better positioned than her to dive into the fentanyl crisis in the US. As she stated in testimony last year, the criminal organizations responsible for bringing fentanyl into this country are modern, sophisticated, and extremely violent enterprises that rely on a global supply chain to manufacture, transport, and sell fentanyl, and rely on a global illicit financial network to pocket the billions of dollars in revenue from those sales. To meet this moment, Administrator Milgram is leading the DEA through a transformation to set a new vision with clear-eyed focus on the global criminal networks most responsible for the influx of fentanyl into the US, while raising public awareness about the scope and scale of the problem. All of this with a singular focus of saving lives in the United States. Please help me welcome DEA Administrator Ann Milgram to the stage.
Good morning. So it's a privilege to be here. Thank you so much to the Chancellor, to Vanderbilt for having us and for having this conversation, which I believe today at this moment is the single most important conversation that we can be having in the United States. I'm going to start by talking about a Nashville native. His name is Ford Ray. Ford grew up just down the street from here. He was a state champion swimmer. He went to SMU. He excelled at academics, at swimming. He played football. He's described by his family as kind, gentle, authentic, and humble. And on April 4th, 2021, Ford took a pill, one pill, that he thought was a Xanax. And he died within hours of taking that pill. Because that pill was not Xanax, it was fentanyl. Even though it looked exactly like a real Xanax pill, it was fentanyl. And he died that very same day. I show you this as a start of the conversation because I want you to understand that fentanyl is killing Americans. It is killing Americans at a rate we have never experienced before, and in a way we have never experienced before. A couple years ago, when I started my job, almost 3 years ago, I talked about fentanyl as the deadliest drug threat in the United States that we had ever seen in the United States. But today I would tell you, it is the most urgent and deadly threat, period, that we are facing. There is nothing that is coming close to the loss of life that we are experiencing at this moment. You just heard some of the statistics, but this is the latest number that is confirmed from the CDC. 107,941 Americans died in 2021. 70% of those deaths are from fentanyl, 30% are from methamphetamine, almost 100% are from the two Mexican cartels that I'm going to talk to you about today. This number is staggering. And to put it in terms that many of the people in this room will understand, we are experiencing 9/11 in the United States every 11 days. The number of Americans dying every 11 days is the same number of lives that we lost on 9/11. I had the opportunity recently to be with one of the former chairs of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who came up to me after and said, it's 2 Vietnams a year. And that is why this is the most urgent threat that we should all be paying attention to and working on. I think that since I started almost 3 years ago, a lot has already changed in the United States. A lot more people today understand the threat than understood it 2 or even 3 years ago. And part of the reason why is this. 42% of Americans now say they know someone who has died from fentanyl. I sat across from a member of Congress recently at an event who told me that his teenage kids have been to 5 funerals in high school for young people who have died from fentanyl poisoning. I want to note also that I call it poisoning because we used to talk about it as overdoses. The CDC still says overdoses. And I would say that, and we've started to convene all the families who've lost loved ones to fentanyl poisoning. And one of the moms came up to me and said, please stop calling it overdoses. My child did not know what they were taking. They were poisoned. So now when I use poison, I use it to refer to people who knew what they were taking and people who didn't know what they were taking. Now, I'm going to give you a couple minutes on Fentanyl 101. I know a lot of people in this room are experts, so stay with me if you are. I also know that every single time I present and I don't talk about what fentanyl is and how it works, I get great questions, and then I realize I should start at the beginning. So let me start a little bit at the beginning. When you think about narcotics or drugs, many people think about whatever you know from growing up. TV shows like Miami Vice, Breaking Bad, This is your brain on drugs, the frying pan that many of us of my age and older remember. Everything you know about drugs, though, I want you to take and put to the side, because the world has completely changed. I'm showing you right now what is a potential deadly dose of fentanyl, 2 milligrams, the amount that could sit on the tip of a pencil. If anyone gets a sugar packet to put in your coffee, if that was pure fentanyl, that would be 500 deadly doses. There are many things that are different about fentanyl. Number one, it's pure chemicals. Pure chemicals. The only thing you need to make this deadly drug are chemicals. It's unlike cocaine, where there is a plot of land you need certain conditions to grow the crop, you've got to harvest the crop, and then you've got to transport it. This, you don't need anything other than those chemicals. So the amount of fentanyl that can be made at this moment across our globe is limitless. The only limit is the amount of chemicals you can procure, and right now in China, you can procure a virtually unlimited amount of these chemicals. So it's chemical, it's also tiny. And the reason the fact that tiny amounts are deadly is important is think about how easy it is to smuggle into the United States. It is also incredibly easy for the cartels to do what they are doing today, which is to hide it in other drugs. So if you go back and think about what you know about narcotics, think about cocaine. People go in to buy cocaine. Drug dealers sell cocaine as cocaine. Not anymore. What is happening now is fentanyl is being hidden in every other drug. It is being cut into cocaine, it is being cut into heroin, it is being cut into methamphetamine, and it is being used by the cartels to make fake pills. That's why I started with the conversation about Ford Ray. He died from a fake Xanax, but this is the bulk of what we see today in the United States. And many of you will recognize that they are fake oxycodone 30 milligram tablets. Why? Why do the cartels do this? One simple reason. We are still coming out of an opioid epidemic in the United States, where we had the overprescribing of pills. We had people seeking pain medicines like this. And so the cartels figured out what they could do is make a very cheap version. The cost of one of these pills in Mexico to make today is probably less than 10 cents. The chemicals are less than 1 penny. So it is dirt cheap to make. In the US, it's sold for between 10 and 30 US dollars on average. And so what they have done is create something that they do not sell as fentanyl. They sell as though they were real pills. And this is what is terrifying in part about this. 22 teens between the ages of 14 and 18 are dying every single week. On social media, if you opened up your phone, please don't do this, trust me. Every once in a while, someone will tell me to look for something on TikTok, which I don't have, or on another app. Every time you look for it, you will get ads, so please don't try this at home. If you did, though, within 2 or 3 or 4 clicks, you can have a drug dealer that will deliver one of these fake pills or another form of fentanyl to your doorstep, like Uber Eats. This is how we get to 107,941 deaths in the United States. So fentanyl is changing everything because of the nature of the drug, the way it is being sold, and how addictive it is. It is 50 times more addictive than heroin. So why do the cartels use it? They want to make more money. They want to expand market share. The more people who are addicted, the more people who will come back and buy fentanyl. Now, there is a lot that is hard and complex about this problem that we'll talk about today. The one thing that is not complex is who is responsible. When I started almost 3 years ago, we stepped back to say, who is responsible for the fentanyl that is on our streets? And by the way, it is in every community in the United States of America. So if anyone thinks that in a rural community or a suburban community you don't have fentanyl, I am here to tell you that it is coast to coast and every community in between because of these 2 Mexican cartels. The Sinaloa cartel is probably the oldest cartel in Mexico. It's the cartel of El Chapo, for those of you who have tracked Mexican cartels through the years. And then the second cartel is the Jalisco or CJ&G cartel, which spun off more recently, within the last 10, 15 years, from the Sinaloa cartel. They are based in Mexico, but they are global criminal enterprises. So let me explain a little bit about their supply chain and how they do what they do. And this is important, I think, because we spent a lot of time talking about the supply chain yesterday. So I'm going to give you a cursory version of what we see and what we're targeting. It starts in China with the sale of precursor chemicals. It used to be the sale of finished fentanyl. China scheduled finished fentanyl in 2019, and now it is precursor chemicals. There are still other finished drugs that are coming out of China, like nitazines, but right now, fentanyl is being made by chemicals that come out of China. The other thing that comes out of China right now are pill presses. In order to make pills that look identical to pharmaceutical drugs, and they do look identical. I should have showed you this on the pill, but I often ask people to guess which is real and which is fake. And I ask you that because at DEA we run 10 labs across the country. We have chemists who do drug testing every single day, and they cannot tell the difference visually. They have to take the pills apart to figure out whether there's fentanyl inside. Here, I won't make you raise your hand. The pill on the right is actually the fake pill. A lot of people think that that would be the real pill because it looks a little bit cleaner and neater, but it's the pill on the left that is the fake pill. And again, no one, including someone purchasing 1 or 2 pills online, would ever know the difference. So these two cartels, how do they do it? They go to China, they buy pill presses in China, they buy chemicals, and they also buy dyes and molds that let them make pills that look identical to the real thing, to Oxy, to Adderall, to Xanax. And we seize pills like that all over the United States that are actually made of fentanyl. They then ship those chemicals and those materials to Mexico. We can talk more about this later, how that process works, but they're obviously not clearly declaring in many instances what they are shipping. In Mexico, the two cartels operate labs that make fentanyl and methamphetamine, and they are mass producing quantities of these drugs. Once they've made the fentanyl, most of the fentanyl is then pressed into pills in Mexico or sent in powder to the US. To give you a sense of this, last year alone, DEA seized almost 80 million fake pills. And that doesn't include our partners at the FBI, who also seized a lot. That doesn't include our partners at CBP, who also seized a lot. We also seized about 12,000 pounds of fentanyl. If you put all of that together, we seized almost 400 million deadly doses of fentanyl on the streets of the United States. So that is manufactured in Mexico. It's pressed into pills. There's also a massive security apparatus run by the cartels. We talk about how violent and deadly they are. They are testing, in one case, which I'll tell you about later, they tested fentanyl on a woman to see how strong it was. She died, and then they sent that batch to the United States. What we are seeing is a callous disregard for human life. The cartels are interested in selling more drugs and making more money and doing it any way they possibly can. Then the fentanyl is smuggled into the United States, predominantly across the border, by land, by air, by sea, by tunnel. And we see this almost every day, coming the most right now through California and Arizona. Those are the two large, there are 4 ports of entry, 2 in California and 2 in Arizona, where most of it is coming in, and then it spreads out throughout the United States. Number 4 on the supply chain, really important. How do cartels get the drugs to the people in the United States? They have drug traffickers that work in communities across the United States that overwhelmingly now are on social media. So yes, you can still buy drugs on the streets of the United States, but the predominant way that we are seeing this happen is social media. And think about the speakers yesterday who talked about globalization and the speed of technology, and this is part of how we get to 107,000 deaths. And then finally, money laundering, which used to be largely run by Colombian and other organizations, has been almost entirely taken over by the Chinese. by Chinese money laundering organizations. And I'll give you the very high level of why that is. And you have Will Kimball, our chief of ops, on the next panel who can get into more detail on this. But the bottom line is that there is a capital flight restriction in China. Individuals in China can get the equivalent of about 50,000 US dollars out legally. So what happens if you're a Chinese national and you want to get more money out? You go to a money broker who will help you get assets, whether it's real estate or money or cash, in the United States or in other countries. Who has the most cash in the United States of America right now? If I ask you to raise your hand, most of you probably don't even have cash in your pocket, right? Who has a lot of cash? Drug traffickers. So the Chinese money laundering organizations have essentially become the banks for the cartels in the United States of America. So before I get to this next slide, let me step back and say the threat is unprecedented. And we often say at DEA now that, everything feels unprecedented in the world we're living in. This is truly unlike anything we've ever seen before. And so unprecedented threats require unprecedented action. Our mission in 2024 is to save American lives by defeating the two cartels responsible for the fentanyl that is killing Americans. So how do we do that? We can't just keep doing business the way we've always done it, because we know it will not work. The first way we've done it is to change the way we approach the problem. And for all the terrorism experts in this room, you switched a lot before we did to a network model. For many years, DEA we were focused on high-value targets. So think about El Chapo. DEA investigated, arrested, convicted El Chapo. He's now serving a life sentence in a federal prison in Brooklyn. And what happened to his criminal organization? His sons took over, the Chapitos. And they took over and they turned his organization into the fentanyl-producing organization we know today. So we took out the top, and what happened? His sons came up and they expanded the organization farther and far more deadly than we had ever seen. So now we have pivoted to take a network approach to map the entire criminal network, to map the entire supply chain, and to be able to understand where those critical vulnerabilities lie. And this is a new thing that we've started over the last essentially 2 or 3 years to try to understand the complete flow of how you get from a chemical in China to a death in the United States of America. The second piece of what we've done to do this effectively, we had to build an entirely new strategic layer over everything we do. We've heard a lot about transformation, about how important it is to change the way we work. For us, one of the things we had to do was step back and ask the question, how do we understand everything we humanly can about the Sinaloa cartel and about the Jalisco cartel? So we built counter-threat teams made up of agents, analysts, data scientists. For the first time ever, we hired expert targeters, financial experts, chemists, chemical experts, and we put them all together, and they did an extraordinary thing, which is they figured out how to access every piece of data that DEA has across our 334 offices worldwide. So for the first time, we can see globally who is responsible, what is happening, and we can start to identify and target the key nodes or vulnerabilities. We started those two teams in September of 2022, and what they have done is extraordinary. Today, any agent in any DEA field office can access the cartel members that we've been able to identify globally from their home office. And there are more than 10,000 members, facilitators, and associates that we've now mapped globally. And any agent across the globe knows that. We've also been able to build much more network-wide prosecutions as a result of this work. Last summer, you see the Bitcoin symbol in the bottom. Our teams figured out that there was so much illicit finance, so much global money laundering, that we couldn't just have two teams. We had to pivot again. And this is one of the things I think will be really important for all of us as we go on, is being willing to continue to innovate and pivot and change where we see the need. Those two teams were being essentially brought down by the amount of finance information they were seeing, and so we spun off a separate team. We now have IRS agents with us. I should have noted we've got some CBP agents with us. We've got a number of other agencies that are joining the fight with us on these teams. And that global finance team is tracking billions of dollars across the globe, much of it in cryptocurrency. So part of what the teams have been able to do is map those two Mexican cartels across the world. I show you this because I think a lot of conversations about fentanyl are China, Mexico, US, and in a certain way that's right, but what is really important to understand is that these are global organizations. They're operating in different ways in different places, but if you look at Australia and New Zealand, they have had fentanyl seizures. The cartels are also there with methamphetamine. So while fentanyl is a uniquely North American problem, the people who have fentanyl use challenges are the United States, Mexico, and Canada. These two cartels control meth pipelines across the globe. And that is one of the reasons why we believe that fentanyl will spread, that it will not stop in the United States, that ultimately, and there have been some seizures in Europe, there have been some seizures in other countries, but ultimately we believe that this is a challenge that all of us will face. I talked a little bit about money laundering, and I want to show you just one of the things that the teams have been able to do, which is to track the money launderers for the cartels. This slide shows you one money launderer, and this is one of the 3 crypto exchanges he uses. And in less than a year, he moved about $300 million in cryptocurrency to launder for the Sinaloa cartel. We are now able to see it and understand it and trace it, and that will let us defeat it. So we've also been able to map, and I apologize, the blue is a little hard to see in the back, but we've also been able to map the flow of precursor chemicals out of China. The chemicals are mostly going to Mexico for fentanyl, but the chemicals are also going across the globe for methamphetamine production. They're used even in making cocaine, which is a plant crop. They're used as well for cocaine. So China is essentially supplying the chemicals to make narcotics globally. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've done and what we're doing, just to give you some examples of how this strategy plays out. In 2023, we took action against every single part of the global supply chain. And we started in China with the Chinese chemical companies and Chinese nationals. We brought the first ever fentanyl trafficking charges against Chinese companies ever in the United States last year. We took 2 Chinese nationals into custody, and all told, so far, we have charged 12 companies and 24 Chinese nationals. This is vitally important work because it lets us show as well globally of what is happening. This is one of the people we talked to during these investigations. We have a number of things that I think would surprise most Americans to know. This woman is telling us, like, our product is great, we're gonna make it easy for you to synthesize, and we're gonna do it cheaper. Come to us, use our company. We had another chemical company in China that we've charged that had a chemist working for them who was teaching people they believed were members of the cartel how to mask fentanyl precursors, how to hide the fact that the chemicals would be used for fentanyl. So this is where the work starts, and again, critically important for us to do. We also charged the entire criminal network, the leadership of the Chapitos, El Chapo's sons. So in a prior time, we would have charged the 3 people in the middle, Ovidio, Ivan, and Jesus. Now we charge the network. We started with the precursor chemical suppliers in China and one of the chemical brokers who was working out of Guatemala to help them procure the chemicals, to the clandestine lab managers making fentanyl in Mexico for the cartel. This is the Sinaloa cartel. To the security and weapons traffickers who are responsible for massive amounts of violence in Mexico against their rivals, against law enforcement who won't cooperate with them. These are the enforcers, the sicarios. To the fentanyl trafficking leaders, the people responsible for the logistics of getting the fentanyl into the US, and then finally to the illicit financiers. 10 of these individuals are now in custody, including Ovidio, who's in custody in Chicago in the United States, and we're working to get the other individuals in custody here. We also did this case strategically to show the public and the United States what the entire supply chain and network looks like. Because the more everyone understands, the more effective we can collectively be. Also last year, we did an effort we called Last Mile. Any supply chain has a last mile problem. You've got to get the product to the customer. And the cartels have to get the product into the hands of Americans. That's how they make money. So we did an investigation across the United States in all of our local communities where we identified the local people who were partnered with the cartel to sell drugs, the people we could link directly back to Sinaloa or Jalisco. We made a large number of arrests, about 3,300 arrests. We seized a ton of guns and fentanyl. And we were able to trace back in many ways how the cartels were operating. And I want to spend a minute on this next piece because this came out of that series of investigations, which is that in almost half of the last mile cases, we had social media as the way that the cartel was selling drugs to users, to people who were buying what they thought mostly were oxy pills. And in about half of those cases, also, we had encrypted applications that are very difficult for law enforcement to see or get into to understand. People always ask me, the number one question I get asked by audiences who know a lot about fentanyl, by audiences who don't know a lot about fentanyl, by kids who are super smart on all this stuff, as you can imagine, is why would a drug trafficker kill their client? Right? It makes no sense. Anyone who applies logic, as everyone in this room will be doing, will be thinking, why would they do that? Couple reasons. Most importantly, I would suggest to you, there are 200 million Americans on social media today. If one of your client dies, this is largely anonymous. You just find the next person on Snapchat, and those snaps disappear after someone has read it. That almost entire record of evidence is gone. And you know, 100,000 Americans died, there are still 200 million Americans on social media. And we all should be concerned about this because the cartels are harnessing technology and they're using it not just to sell, but also to work together and to communicate. And encryption is also a massive problem for all of us to confront as we try to save lives and stop the next person from dying. There are phones we cannot get into because of encrypted devices and applications. Let me tell you one quick story about some of the other work we're doing. In addition to the work we're doing across the criminal networks and strategically at DEA, we spend a lot of time working in our communities. We spend a lot of time focused on violence that drug trafficking drives in communities. We've worked in 86 cities and counties to date, trying to reduce violence with local police and our other federal partners. We also run something called OD Justice, where we partner with any police department in the United States that wants help investigating a drug poisoning or a drug poisoning death, they can call us. And we've now done hundreds of these cases, many with our federal partners at the U.S. Attorney's offices, and that lets us identify who is responsible for selling the pill that killed someone or selling the fentanyl that killed someone. It lets us take those drugs off the street that are likely to kill additional people, and it lets us bring some justice to the families who've lost loved ones. Here, this was an OD justice case, one of the cases that we do with local police departments. It started like all these cases start. We got a call from a police department. Here it was the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. Diamond Lynch was a 20-year-old mother working at Walmart planning her son's first birthday party when she took a pill that she thought was a Percocet, and she died. We immediately identified with our local partners the two men who had sold her that pill in Washington. And we didn't stop there. We identified that they were communicating on Instagram with the source of supply in Los Angeles. We went to our Los Angeles office, who investigated, who arrested them. As part of that investigation, we did not stop there. We identified another source of supply in San Diego. Our team, our office in San Diego, did an investigation, arrested those individuals, and we didn't stop there. We then went back to Sinaloa, Mexico, where we identified the cartels and the source of supply responsible for making that pill that led to Diamond Lynch's death on the streets of Washington, D.C. In total so far, it's an ongoing investigation. We've charged 25 individuals, and this is an example of what we are seeing every day. The cartel used Instagram to coordinate its internal operations. So some cartel members are using it to sell, others are using it to work together. The other thing that we spend a lot of time on is public awareness. So why do I get on a plane and leave Washington, D.C. when Americans are dying? Because I want every single person in this room to understand what is happening and to go out and spread the word. We need to reach more people, and we need to reach them faster. When I started, 4 out of 10 fake pills were deadly. Today, 7 out of 10 fake pills are deadly. The percentage of purity in the fentanyl that is coming into the US has skyrocketed. And if people do not understand what is happening, we cannot protect Americans. Our job is to do everything we can to defeat the cartels. We also collectively, as a country, need to make sure everybody understands. And it is intentionally deceptive and treacherous. The reason the cartels don't sell it as fentanyl, they hide it in cocaine or they sell it as oxy, is to try to make it seem like it is not as deadly and as dangerous as it is. So I have a son, so many of us have children. We spend time with the families who've lost loved ones. And the single most important thing for all of us in this moment, in addition to the work that we do in our day jobs, is to make sure that everyone understands what we know. So if you haven't told your kids or your family, and by the way, we see children, we see toddlers, we see babies that accidentally get into their parents' supply. They see a blue pill, they take that pill, and they die. We see older Americans who are looking for pain medicine. We see construction workers who just had an injury. This crosses every single line, every single part of our country. And so all of us have to be talking about it. We started a campaign a couple years ago called One Pill Can Kill. I've written for all of you the website, dea.gov/onepill. If you go on that website, we have materials that you can give to your schools, to your communities, to anyone. We have police departments who've taken it, we have universities who've taken it, and we don't brand it. So you take it, you want it, it's yours, you can do anything you want with it, and we believe that this message, it's getting through and is starting to get folks to understand fentanyl more. I want to close where I started, which is what's happening in the United States of America. About 2 years ago, when we had the first families coming in, we decided that I was seeing the law enforcement reports. So anybody who's been in law enforcement knows every single week I'm going to see who's been arrested, where they've been arrested, what happened. But I was seeing them as individual events. And we were reacting to those individual events. But in order to win, in order to be effective here, we have to see it all together as one picture of what's happening. And we wanted to show the harm that was happening that wasn't just in one community, it was across the globe and across the United States. And so we invited the 80 families who were coming in to meet with us, we invited them to send pictures of their loved ones. We thought, what could be more effective, instead of having it be one loss of life here, loss of life here, to see 80 photos together on the wall. So we expected to get between about 80 and 100 photos, and we did within the first few days. We were astonished by what has happened. We now have more than 5,000 photos that line the walls of DEA headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. It's public. We have families who now take a pilgrimage to come and put their loved ones' photos on the wall. The reason I have the picture of Ford Ray is that his parents sent it to us, and his face is on our wall. Why I show this to you together is that when you see it, you start to understand that when you see what is happening, you see the faces of America. You see men and women in uniform, you see parents, you see kids at soccer games, at sporting events. This is a national security threat. It is a public safety threat. It is a public health threat, and it is impacting everyone. Everyone. And so we now have so many pictures from across the United States that we are building a digital kiosk because we don't have enough wall space to put them up. When I see this wall, and Will would say the same thing I would say, it hurts our heart and it makes us angry to walk by this wall. And I do it all the time. Why? It's a call to action. It is a reminder of the urgency that this is the greatest threat we face, and we have to solve this. It's also a memorial to the lives that have been lost. And so I'm thrilled to be here. I'm excited to answer your questions, and I hope that we can all work together to solve this. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for everything you do. It's with so much passion and purpose. And as you said, there is no community that's immune from this crisis, including mine. And it is the greatest threat we face for our children, for ourselves, for our parents, for national security, and for this country. My first question is, how did we get here? How did China get such a leg up on us?
So we talk about this a lot, and we particularly talk about it with our foreign partners, because if you look at what happened in the United States, we had an opioid epidemic with doctors overprescribing prescription pain medicine, like oxys. Then the United States pulled back on the amount of oxy that doctors could prescribe. At that point, the Mexican cartels started moving black tar heroin into the United States, and they were able to offer that heroin to people who had become addicted to opioids, which are what oxy and heroin are. What happened in the US, this started about a decade ago, 2014, is that they started lacing a lot of the drugs with fentanyl. We did not know that. We were not looking for fentanyl. And so if you look at the graph, you would see fentanyl sort of heroin slowly going down and fentanyl slowly going up. But the fentanyl was hidden in other things. So if you think about this, and this is what we tell our foreign partners all the time, you have to start testing for it. Because by the time we realized what was happening, we were very far along a path where we were testing for heroin, we were finding heroin, but we weren't testing the entire substance. We now test every single substance, every part of it. In the last year, also in 2023, we opened a joint lab with CBP and the FDA for fentanyl along the border, one of our border offices in El Paso. We're testing everything, and we'll be able to identify what chemicals are used, which cartel we believe has made it. But again, I think we weren't looking for what was there.
And I just want to remind the audience that you can send questions in. So if you have questions, please send them to the email that's up there. You recently took a trip to China, which must have been fascinating, given that we've been pretty clear and precise about identifying the problem that China is sort of behind. Can you tell us a little bit about that trip? What happened? How was it? How were you received?
So let me start by also stepping back, because I mentioned that we brought the criminal charges against the Chinese chemical companies and the Chinese nationals. We also work across government. The Treasury Department issued a number of sanctions against those companies. And so the impact, we believe, and was significant in our saying publicly, here's what's happening and here's what we think is driving it, and we think it's virtually all coming from China. So the President of the United States, who is in the executive branch, my boss, met with the President of China, President Xi, in November in San Francisco at the Woodside Summit. There was one area where they agreed to work together and cooperate, and that is counter-narcotics. So within a week, I was sitting in the Roosevelt Room at the White House having a conversation with the President and others about where do we go from here. The reason the President is focused on this is that if you look at the supply chain, it's very clear that if we could stop what's happening in China, we can have a significant impact on the fentanyl coming to the US. We understand that there are other countries that make a lot of chemicals, like India and others, but right now, the locus of this problem is absolutely China. So I went over with a delegation led by the Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, Jen Daskell, and we did a day of meetings that I think were very important to sort of reset what this conversation is, which is a very vital one for the United States, and I believe a global problem. What we also, in terms of, and so we've begun the effort to have some law enforcement cooperation, and we'd had none since I started. So these are the first sort of aspects of any cooperation. I will tell you, as I sit here, we don't yet know whether this will be effective. I also have said, and I will say, every single day in this job, that there is no lawful tool I won't use to protect American lives, and there's nothing we won't do as an agency to do that, including if I have to get on a plane and go to Beijing to try to convince them to stop and to start arresting chemical companies and individuals. There was one highlight, I think, that we should focus on just for a second. The one place I think we've seen some progress is the scheduling of chemicals. And so China has agreed to schedule any chemical that the UN schedules, and that's very important because there are critical fentanyl chemicals that China has not scheduled that are essentially only used for fentanyl. And again, I don't think it's enough, but I do think it's an important part of what I hope is an ongoing conversation about scheduling substances across the globe.
Can you tell us why scheduling a substance is important?
Yeah, so with scheduling, what happened when China scheduled finished fentanyl in 2019 is that it stopped. It basically stops coming out of China. So if China schedules all of the fentanyl chemicals and the nitazines, which are finished opioids, they are not fentanyl, but they are as, if not more deadly than fentanyl, and we are finding them in the United States. If they schedule those drugs, they stop. Now, can the cartels come up with other ways to do it? Of course, but those ways are harder. They might be easier also for us to stop or interdict. And so it's a one piece of what we do, but it is an important thing. The global community, this is led by the UN, agrees there are certain chemicals that just should not be in use. And again, if we can get those off, it is a small piece of what we need to do in the bigger picture.
China has claimed that they're aligned with us from an interdiction perspective, and yet their activities don't really underscore their commitment to interdiction. What's their true economic incentive here to be partners with us on this?
So I would say a couple of things that are important for us and that we have conveyed, which is first, yes, right now fentanyl is a North American problem, but the same cartels are also active in other parts of the world. There is a meth issue in China, there is a ketamine issue, and there is some heroin. My own view is anyone who has any opioid is very much at risk for fentanyl. Anyone who has the cartels, and the cartels, again, you saw the map, are global, is at risk for fentanyl and the cartel methamphetamine. And so I do believe that there is a global risk for every country, including China. The second piece is that we have been very clear in saying we will not stop doing the work we're doing in China. We'll continue to investigate. We will continue to prosecute. We have a long-arm law that lets us charge individuals abroad. If you followed the recent conviction of the former president of Honduras, that was a DEA case. We have very strong capabilities globally, and so, we'll continue to do the work we need to do. And if they're willing to work with us, shut down bank accounts, stop chemical companies from exporting, that would be a good thing.
Question from the audience. Have you looked at ways to disrupt the cartels through non-kinetic means like cyber and through information operations? Is this an area where the DEA can partner with other agencies?
Yes, let's talk. One of the things I was really excited about yesterday is that I think sometimes, one thing we're doing, I showed you the work on the teams. We're sort of trying to evolve to the next level to build a cross task force that will be law enforcement, IC and DOD, which is what happened with terrorism, and my view is this is where we need to go. So we're very focused on how do we get everybody in the same room together, going in the same direction. Unlike in terrorism, I think most of the information was classified, and so we should talk about this for a minute. In narcotics, most of it is not. Most of it is law enforcement. And if you take the law enforcement information that we at DEA have, and you couple that with open source information, you have a pretty incredible picture of what's happening. We do need assistance, though, from the IC on a number of things, and they have capabilities that we don't have. So this is a partnership that I think for all of us collectively we need to build. And what I loved about being here yesterday is it got me thinking about what the capabilities are in the IC and DOD that we might not know. And so we would love to have these conversations with, Will Kimball is here, he'll be on the next panel. We'd love to have it with anyone, and any of you want to grab me after, the answer is yes. We'd love to have the conversations and find ways to work together.
Well, we have great representation from the IC community, so hopefully we can help facilitate that. Do the drug cartels compete or cooperate?
That's a great question. So yes, they both. So in Mexico, there's a lot of competition for example, the plazas where the drugs come across the border, right? If you control that plaza, you control the drugs coming into the United States. So there is competition. There's also competition in the Mexican states. The cartels are in the vast majority of Mexican states. For turf, there's often, they try to corrupt local officials. And so there is a lot of competition. There are brutal rivalries. We talk about the violence, but one of the things we saw in the Chapitos case is that they kept tigers that they would feed their rivals to, both dead and alive. So there is a level of just raw violence between them. When it comes to the United States, there are communities that are both Sinaloa and CJ&G. There are also many that literally two communities next to each other. One will be Sinaloa, one will be CJ&G that is providing the drugs. The one other thing I would just say that I worry a lot about is if you think about it, it's not a monopoly, it's a duopoly or whatever you call it. There are two criminal organizations, the two Mexican cartels, that control virtually the entire U.S. drug supply. They are polydrugs. So they're not just bringing fentanyl and meth in, they're also bringing heroin and cocaine. And what that means is that within a very short amount of time, they can put any substance they want into essentially any community in America. And that, to me, is something we should all be worried about from a national security and a homeland security perspective.
We are getting a lot of questions. Here's an important one. Is there evidence that fentanyl is being hidden in vaping products? Many children are turning to vaping based on perception that it's safe.
So this has come up with us a lot recently. We had a series of takedowns we just did in North Carolina with our local partners where there were a lot of teens that were going to the emergency room. And they were essentially, probably marijuana, we think, was being preloaded into the vapes. We are very concerned about this because you can load fentanyl into a vape. We do not see it widespread, but we do know that smoke shops across the U.S. are now selling pre-filled vapes, and nobody knows what's inside, right? And so, again, we just shut down about 60 of them, I think, and we're having conversations with the U.S. military as well around bases where the smoke shops are setting up right outside. But this is something, and again, some of this is talking as parents. This terrifies me, right? We see kids with vapes all the time. Your kid could be in a room and you wouldn't smell it, you wouldn't know it was happening, and your child has no idea what's inside.
You told the tragic story of the woman who was killed by the cartel as they were testing their drugs before shipping them and explained why there's complete indifference from a numbers perspective. But how is it in the cartel's economic interest to be indifferent to killing their customers?
So the way we think about it is that the main goal of the cartel is to expand and reach as many people as they can and to drive, essentially they use fentanyl to drive addiction because if someone is taking fentanyl, the likelihood that they're gonna come back and buy again and again is very high. Fentanyl, I should have said, it's a very fast-acting drug and it has a very short duration. So it's not like something that would keep someone high for a very long period of time. So somebody's going to come back and start buying 3, 4, or 5 times a day. That's their business model. Part of their business model is also understanding that we will interdict millions of their pills and that some of their pills will kill people. And we believe that the reason that they're okay with this is, number one, they will find another customer if someone dies. And number two, the cost of that pill to make is so cheap. The cost of fentanyl, the chemicals, again, are less than 1 penny per dose. And so if they can get even, a percentage of the pills and the powder that they make into the US that's then sold for $10 to $30 per dose, think about that markup, right? Think about that profit. And so we think that it's part of the business model to have people die and to have a lot interdicted.
It's pretty hard to process that when they're killing 100,000 customers a year. There's no other business that could survive a fraction of that. And at some point, they're going to run out of customers. Sadly, tragically, they might run out of customers.
So one of the things we're seeing, which concerns us a lot, I realize I'm like the bad news presenter. I'll give you a couple pieces of good news in a minute. We're seeing more. We've never seized more fentanyl than we seized last year. Every year we're seizing more, and we're seeing the prices go down, and that means they're making more, right? So there is almost a glut along the border. There is so much that they're pushing in. And again, you would think that the loss of lives would cause them to do something different. We have not seen that. at this point. We have not seen that. If anything, we've seen them making more to try to, get more into the United States. I'll tell you a little bit of good news, I think, and I do think, first of all, I think public awareness is at just a completely different point than it was 3 years ago. A number of states have passed laws to do education in schools, which we think is vital. And so we do see some of that moving. We also have incredible agents. Like I've seen in the last couple months, some of the most, I can't talk about a lot of it today, but I've seen some of the most extraordinary work I've ever seen in my law enforcement career. And so I'll give you one example that is public, the Indian murder for hire case recently in New York, where we charged an Indian national with the attempted murder of a Sikh in New York City. That case was made by an agent in less than 30 days, and we had someone in custody for that attempted murder. When I was briefed on that case, I sat across from the agent, and he said, "You gave me my badge 2 years ago," right? That's an extraordinary thing. We have remarkable young agents who are innovative and creative and are seeing what we're doing with data and technology. And I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what we're able to do and how we can defeat the cartels.
You talked about having a new network-based approach to solving the supply chain problem here and disrupting it. Are you seeing positive effects of that, or is it too soon to tell?
So there are a few things I think. Yes, we are making progress. We have changed largely the conversation nationally, and also the focus. When we named the two cartels 2 years ago, no one was talking about them. And to me, this is a really important thing. Think about Al-Qaeda, think about ISIS. We talk about them all the time. We put the X on them as these are the networks we need to defeat. It is very hard to just say we're going to defeat fentanyl, right? And the more we looked at this at DEA, it was two organizations that are responsible. And so we are seeing a number of things that are happening as a result of naming them and targeting them. We are now at the point that we can do even more disruption because of our mapping of the network and doing some of the financial work, which you will see in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, that I think will have a huge impact globally and in the United States. What I also think is that we have to do more, right? And we talk about this a lot, like how do we meet this moment? We've transformed. We're not doing enough yet. None of us are doing enough. This is the most urgent moment. And so to me, how do we work more with the IC? How do we do more with DOD? How do we collectively get the funding to do this? The top 2 causes of death in the United States are cancer and heart disease. Next. It's not COVID. It's not car accidents. It's fentanyl and methamphetamine that is killing Americans. And there is no cancer moonshot equivalent for stopping fentanyl. There is no sort of consolidated effort to get people to put money to DOD, to the IC, to law enforcement to stop this threat, right? And so that's where I think we all need to collectively be going. And some of it just requires us to be saying, this is the most urgent threat we face.
That's so interesting because unlike the first 2 issues, this is not a science problem we have to solve. This is committing to solving the problem and putting all our resources against it.
Yes, that's right. And these are global organizations that are using fentanyl today. But I always think, we have to be proactive in looking ahead. It is fentanyl today. It could be something else tomorrow. So we need to learn how to do this and stop this threat from the 2 cartels now, because I do think we heard a lot yesterday, all the threats are evolving.
You've talked a lot about the financial flows. What agency is responsible for interdicting the crypto flows, both traffickers as well as the nation states that are using crypto?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we obviously work a lot with Treasury. We have started this team. We have extensive cryptocurrency data and information from the cartels that we are now able to use to map and to identify the money launderers. We also have found, this will not surprise anyone in this room, that everyone is connected. Every money launderer in the United States, there's a connection between them. And many of them are connected to like 5 or 10 super money launderers for the cartels across the globe. Some of the money launderers work for one cartel. Many of them work for both. They're essentially money launderers. That is what they do. So we have invited Treasury to join our team. We work very closely with the FinCEN group, which has the bulk data on financial transactions. And again, some of this is trying to break down barriers across government to get everybody in the room together.
It's interesting that the money launderers don't have non-compete clauses, apparently, and maybe we should adopt that in the U.S. government. So you made a really powerful case around social media, and as you know, there's a national debate going on with respect to banning TikTok. Would banning TikTok make a difference in the fight against fentanyl?
So we do see sales of fentanyl on TikTok. One of the things I've done with some of the leadership of social media is walk them across our the memorial we have in DEA headquarters, because I can show you who died from a pill on Snap. I can show you who died from a pill on TikTok or Facebook, and it is a very powerful thing to be able to say, you claim you have a platform and you're neutral, but look at what you're doing, right? Look at what's happening. And the thing I would say to all of you in this room who understand the terrorism context of social media, remember that this was an issue initially after 9/11 of all the recruitment that was happening on social media. And social media companies made it zero tolerance for terrorism, right? That is the practice today. There's a group of social media companies that essentially work together to stop terrorist activity on any platform. There is another area that's also zero tolerance, which is child sexual exploitation, CSAM. So terrorism, child sexual exploitation, those are the two zero tolerance. If you were to pick up the social media terms of service in almost any social media company, you will find that there is not a zero tolerance policy for the sale of fentanyl or other illicit drugs. Everyone in this room knows this. You cannot buy a legitimate pharmaceutical on a social media company, period, right? I think you know this. You should remind your kids of this. You can't buy a real Xanax. You can't buy a real Oxy. Like, that is illegal anyway. That cannot happen. And so they shouldn't be on those sites to begin with, and they're fentanyl. And it's essentially what we have said to the companies is any pill can kill someone. It is an emergency situation. It is a security threat. So we are basically saying to them, you got to make a zero tolerance policy. Right now, it's sort of at the bottom of many terms of services, along with other crimes, right? Don't do all these bad things, and that's how it's sort of operating.
That's really interesting, because what it says to me is that the social norm around the fentanyl crisis isn't well defined, right? The social norm around the fact that child pornography is unacceptable is well defined. The social norm that terrorism must be stopped is well defined. And as a society, we haven't yet embraced this idea that there has to be a social norm that selling drugs through technology platforms is killing Americans and is not okay, which is why your call to action earlier was so important.
I would also just add, just to sort of put an exclamation point on what you said, in the 5 years from essentially up till April of last year, the 5 years before that, every single social media platform, Snap, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you name it, all totaled had sent DEA less than 50 referrals of drug trafficking. Right? At a time where 100,000 Americans have died every year for the last 3 years, less than 50 in 5 years. So some of this is around social norms. Some of this is also getting folks to understand that we know they don't intend for people to die on their platforms. We know that's not their goal, but it's happening, and everybody's got to get together and stop it.
General Barry McCaffrey, who was our first drug czar, famously said, if you want to fight a war on drugs, sit down at your own kitchen table and talk to your own children. And it's a powerful quote, but it sets the context of this problem as an issue of morality, and that it's about drugs. Is this about a war on drugs?
So I like to say, and I say this almost every day, it is not a war on drugs, it's a fight to save lives. And that is what we're facing. And that's the conversation I think we need to start having across the country, is that this is different. When I walk in a room with our Mexican counterparts or in China, the talking point that they give us is always the same. This is U.S. demand driving. I would very strongly argue with that. People are not demanding fentanyl, right? Most people have no idea that they're getting fentanyl. And on top of that, this is just at a level of risk where I walked out of our first family summit, and there was a mom who had lost both of her sons. They were twins, they were hockey players, and they split one pill, and they both died the same night. And she grabbed me, she was crying, and she said, this could happen to anyone. And I walked out of that room knowing it could truly happen to any of us. her kids were great kids. This isn't about any of that. This is about a national threat that is pervasive and being sold everywhere. And a kid on social media who has a drug dealer in their pocket isn't thinking twice about it. They're thinking, oh, that's an Oxy or that's an Adderall. I can stay up tonight. And so that kind of conversation, to me, with our kids constantly is vital. And the thing she said to me, which brings us back, is that she said, I wish I'd talked to my kids when they were in kindergarten. And I thought, God, that's so young, right? It would never have occurred to me to even think about it. And she said, I wish I talked about being healthy and only taking medicines from your doctor. So I went home that night. My son was then 7, and my husband was like, what happened today? Because it was a pretty intense dinner conversation, and we've had it many times since then. But if you're not having it, everybody's got to have it. Everybody.
And thank you so much for this incredible and incredibly important conversation. Thank you for everything you do, and to everyone who works at the DEA. Please join me in thanking Anne for this conversation.